Opening fire.
Hindsight is 2020, an expression to convey that it's easier to analyze events after they've transpired, rather than while they're happening. As if to say we could learn from hindsight because there's no manual on how humanity must progress into the future. And if there was, perhaps the dude it was given to at the beginning of time couldn't read and binned it because it wasn't a picture book. Anyways, once the Americans had dropped the bombs at the end of the Second World War, the world got together having witnessed their destructive power, and collectively agreed to never use nukes again. Immediately thereafter, everyone betrayed one another and hundreds of test nukes were launched. No one really talks about these launches because they're not part of the official IRL humanity law, in the same way that, say, Mark Zuckerberg being an alien is.
I am not a lizard.
But despite the powers that be trying their best to scrub this little known fact, this is why Australia lacks a complete atmospheric barrier, and partially why we must all have a ground harness lest we be sucked into space through our hole in the ozone layer. The problem with this expression is 2020 vision is average human vision. It's not even good vision. But in some ways this makes the expression better because humanity is remarkable at not learning from its past mistakes, and prone to repeating them. In Fallout 4, where everywhere you look is a reminder that the world's leaders with their room temperature IQ chose mutually assured destruction, there's one man who has not a single hindsight in sight. We care only about our money-making plantations. With all this wealth and no one with nuclear armaments to oppose us, there's absolutely nothing preventing us from becoming a nuclear superpower. And this is where Preston comes in. Preston's a pretty positive, happy-go-lucky guy, a man who simply wants to recruit as many settlements as humanly possible so that he can bring hope to the hopeless. And we're going to turn him into someone that takes hope from everyone else. For him to be working for me, he has to represent me, and I can't have him representing me if he looks like that. He has to look like a man of power. A man of cruelty. I build this conveyor belt specifically for this reason. You see, we are going to turn one item into two. Our bathrobe, our clout glasses, our moldy fedora. All we have to do is build a conveyor belt. A conveyor storage clipping inside a vacuum hopper along the conveyor belt. Then we drop our bathrobe and other items onto it. Collect them as they're half within the shadow of the conveyor storage and half out. And the next thing you know, we have two of them. It's just that simple. It just works. We now promote Preston to the rank of bathrobe, and like the Agents of the Matrix series, we are matching. Only sexier. More suave. With his appearance up to standard, the next thing we have to do is arm him in such a way that he becomes of the robe. A nuclear superpower. I travel to Goodneighbor where Cleo has a highly unstable, highly fragile nuclear-capable weapon. Clearly loaded, possibly with the safety off, leaning against this wall. This is now Preston's, along with the mini-nuke we have in our inventory. Our first job on the road together is to do a small quest for a settlement I put off doing like several weeks ago. The nuclear weaponry now in Preston's possession should surely give him the power needed to match Florber's ability to explode people's heads with one punch.
Hold up. Opening fire.
Preston has terrible aim, and that was our only mini-nuke. I demote Preston to feminine laundry wear. May he swiftly learn his lesson. This causes him to fully wig out as if he'd huffed a kilo of jet, something those of us with chem addictions can find relatable. Of course, I always knew that with most conventional weapons in Fallout 4, once you'd given a companion a single round for a particular kind of weapon, they then had infinite of that type in their inventory. For example, a single 10mm round in their inventory and a minigun to fire it would mean the game would treat them as having infinite of that ammo type. This doesn't work with explosive weaponry like mini-nukes and missiles. The game instead only allowing your companion to use the amount allocated to them. I guess because Bethesda didn't want us to cheese too much. So they uncheesed the cheese, but I am determined to turn this mush into muscle, which means we need to uncheese the uncheese of the cheese. Because Globby Norbongos is an incredibly cheap and sleazy settlement governor, instead of purchasing a mini-nuke with our vast plantation-funded wealth, I go into the wilderness to a location where I know I can find one at the USAF satellite station. I handle the bandits in this location as I always have, with our huge single point in intelligence. The biggest point in intelligence. And here it is, another nuclear armament someone just left out on a table. An incredibly sensitive piece of weaponry to be handled only with the utmost deliberation and care. I return to Sanctuary so we can use our magical conveyor belt to clone this warhead, only to notice the security booth above Mama Murphy's hatch is unmanned, and the guard I'd assigned to it is wandering around the settlement, befuddled by a basic flight of stairs.
Hi, how are you?
Though I be a generous governor, I am not one to take lightly the slothism spread by Mama Murphy. The guard slips into this pillory like a well-oiled moron, and her punishment is complete. But wait, what was that about Mama Murphy's feeding hatch and a guard who's supposed to look over it? That sounds like a dark and elaborate human centipede-like system of torture. What's that all about? Well, I'm glad you asked. But to understand, we have to first go back. If you hear from my last video, not only did you have an aneurysm from my pronunciation of MUTFRUIT, but you're aware that our money-making scheme was a highly dubious plantation at Red Rocket. We'd plant MUTFRUIT, have the settlers farm it, wait 8 hours, and then fast travel in return for our loot. However, I'd come to the realization that my 17 settlers have a potential to farm up to 102 food as opposed to our measly current 85. This is an indication of a shortage of MUTFRUIT plants. And because our settlement is nearing its maximum capacity, I forego the luxury of private shelters offered to my workers in exchange for more MUTFRUIT. Now they will sleep in here. The garage. Every day they work the fields. Every night I push this button so they can stumble back in here for rest. Some of them get their pathing stuck, so I have to put them to sleep myself. I ring this bell in the dead of the night to make sure they are all assigned to the fields and generating income. It's pretty unsettling. The people celebrate their living conditions because I keep them safe from the horrors of the outside. That not only goes for Red Rocket, I did the same for Sanctuary, now a prison colony. I had decided I could no longer tolerate Mama Murphy's sloth-like presence, lest she taint my hard-working mute-fruiters with her chem-slinging ways. And this is a clean society, so I had her encased in concrete, a prison to keep her from ever seeing the light of day. I erect a Mama Murphy concrete box viewing platform. A small hatch remains unsealed so that we can deliver her a daily allowance of supplies, MUTFRUIT to sustain her, and Jet to keep her inner demons at bay. Sanctuary's a paradise by no means, but Florbin didn't get here by being a nice guy. We got here by being a dominant force, an unwavering leader.
This place is really coming together, huh?
Anyway, I place the mini nuke on a conveyor, and like a prophet splitting bread and fish to his 40 followers, I turn 1 into 2, 2 into 3, and 3 into eventually 34. More than enough to arm Preston, and go to meet him just outside of a location called the castle. His position as leader of this group of Minutemen is immediately noticeable. Look at his commanding presence. But because we've already initiated the quest to recapture the castle from the mutated goobers within, I'm not able to recruit and trade items with him until the task is completed. Easy peasy.
Check it out. I'm on it, General.
This man has become unstoppable, the instrument of my will. Only sometimes though. He tends to fire his nuke with a complete and utter lack of discretion. It often results in my death. I am and will always be in danger so long as this numpty wields this kind of power. This is a man who either has no clue that the destructive power of nukes is what led to the apocalypse, or he does and doesn't care. In any case, now that the right hand of God Emperor Florbin is armed and ready, it is time to prevent our death from continuously occurring through Preston's idiotic friendly fire. And I know just the thing. In our last video, we left our suit of power armor in Concord as soon as we turned that one Deathclaw into Blood Mist. I returned to retrieve the power armor and I watched the fire dance in Preston's eyes as he wantonly turns the town of Concord into a nuclear wasteland for another 200 years. He would ask me which target I want dead, and he would immediately fire after without any input from me. The man is a psychopath. I retrieve the T-45 power armor and take it to Sanctuary. But because it's a rusty 200-year-old gimp suit, I upgrade it exactly 1 level above its original form. Not massive upgrades, but it's all I'm capable of with my single point of intelligence, and every improvement bumps my survivability up a fair amount. Should Preston go full single-digit IQ again. We return to the castle to continue to improve our network of MUTFRUIT plantations. You have to understand, the Commonwealth is my territory, my turf. Everyone wants in on the turf, so I have to keep expanding. Every settlement we convert, I will shamelessly turn into a plantation with substandard sleeping quarters. I would like nothing more than to go full Guy Fieri and lather a mini nuke in barbecue sauce, then send Ronnie down to Flavortown. But unfortunately, she's essential to the main quest. She tells us there's an old bunker underneath the castle where all the old Minutemen kept their stash of weapons. Perhaps if they used their weapons, they wouldn't have gone extinct like the prehistoric dodo. Notoriously unintelligent and weak, like pre-mini nuke Preston. So deeper into the bunker we go to get these armaments, until we encounter robot Kristen Stewart. Such expression. Preston in his dress of mediocrity hasn't reached his full power yet and is no match. And Ronnie is completely worthless. So it's down to Florbnorbler to use peak muscularity to bring down this thirsty beast. We find a sick replacement hat on the corpse of General McGann. Ronnie begins to grieve General McGann's loss, so we perform a service in his honor. To help her grieve. Emerge from the below with some artillery which we place around the MUTFRUIT irrigation walls, and we're told we have to fire some test rounds. Ronnie tells me to test fire on that building over there. Preston doesn't hear this, and like how those old Shaolin monks would continuously kick thick bamboo shoots in order to strengthen their bones, I take this opportunity to strengthen Preston. He is ready. There's a challenge we can take on to determine the efficacy of his destructive power in a more practical way, because everything we've seen so far has been pretty hit and miss, and when he even does hit, it tends to be me and my power armor, which is now totally destroyed, but at least it does its job and prevents my death. We return to Sanctuary, repair the power armor, clone some fusion cores and some more nukes. We acknowledge that Preston's abuse of his power is fearless at the very least, and promote him to sequin dress wearer. Not quite blue bathrobe just yet, he would need more finesse to wear the blue bathrobe. The aforementioned challenge for Preston is going to be the impossible task of finding my son, a task we as Fallout 4 players have all ignored for extensive periods of time. So we have to free a private investigator called Valentine, who is locked in a room by a gangster called Dinosaur, who surely is no match for our nuclear weapon. Valentine is an old pocket pussy that gains sentience, and is voiced by the guy who did the vendor in Skyrim, you know, the one who wants to sell his sister, Bellathor. There's an ambush waiting for us, but we're experts at defusing ambushes, so the likelihood that any of these people walk away is quite slim. The last time we got ambushed was by a rogue settler trying to lure us into a trap. Anyway, Valentine sends us on our way to find a guy named after Cornflakes, who is the last person to know about the location of our son. Our journey is far more eventful than I care to go into any great detail. The sheer quantity of times I'm friendly fired to within an inch of my life is unimaginable, and this took me several real-life hours and constant reloads. Preston would also get caught on the absolute weirdest parts of the terrain and end up stuck there in a loop until such a time as I decided to intervene. My day was well and truly ruined, but at least a couple hours in I got to experience the camera clipping through Florbin, Norblon, Snorblorblers, Globbers, Libble Snatcher's face. So that's something. Once we'd reached Kellogg's Special K's hideout, I was far more afraid of the damage Preston was going to do to me than any of Special K's security. You could just see each bout of friendly fire in slow motion before it would happen. This peaks around the time an armless assailant comes after me. It has no arms, it can't really do damage, it's not really a threat, and will perish after a single punch. Alas, the man knows no shame. We find Rice Krispies in the final room in the hideout and get ready for the penultimate test of Preston's power. I understand that in dialogue I'm standing between Preston and the target, so I do every chem in my possession in preparation for my immediate annihilation upon entering combat.
Fuck you, Kellogg.
With Tony the Tiger's death, we walk outside and are immediately met by a new rival faction at once our ripe MUTFRUIT territory. Our end goal now is to remove them from our turf, but to do that we have to first work our way through the main quest, and also get Preston stronger. In the previous video I made a big fuss about only having 1 point in intelligence, but I've actually been leveling intelligence for a little while now, because there's one more very important upgrade for Preston, the MIRV launcher. The MIRV launcher is an experimental upgrade for the Fat Man missile launcher, which converts it from a weapon that fires only 1 nuke into a weapon that fires 6, all for the cost of only 1 nuke. I can only imagine the absolute shit show that is about to ensue. And what you're seeing in front of you right now is Florber studying to get more intelligence. You see, every item you place in your settlement nets you XP. This particular item can be placed over and over without restriction, meaning we are gaining XP as quickly as we can slam the E button. But what's that? How do I have over 20,000 steel to do this? Good question, you sexually attractive viewer. I'd only started with 264 steel, but Todd programmed in such a way to get more of these materials while doing very little to earn it. You see, if you drop a material on the ground and hit the store and scrap buttons at the same time, it will open 2 windows. If you then scrap and store the same material at the same time, the game doesn't check for whether you've done one or the other first, and doubles the resource. This basically means infinite resources if you so desire it, but in our case, just enough to get over 20k shall suffice. Now we place this fence over and over while watching something on a second monitor, and this equates to near limitless experience as well. Oh yeah? Dark Souls 1 Mel undead voice lines. In universe, this speaks volumes of Florber's ability to take nothing and turn it into something, like some kind of godly prophet. Not too dissimilar from how Preston's Fat Man will fire one nuke and turn it into 6. This is simply Fallout science. With our new points in intelligence, the science perk and gun nut perk, we can now craft a MUTFRUIT launcher. Don't be alarmed how this thing only says it does 18 damage, it's lying. But there's no use him having this unbelievable weapon if he's just going to be riddled with bullets in combat and down before he is truly effective. So I purchased Preston a power armor frame, but it has no actual armor on it. I've been ripped off. So I head on down to the Atom Cats who try to recruit me, but we care not. We care only for MUTFRUIT and stealing their shit.
I'd say Boss Man thinks you have a little Atom Cat in you.
The only cat in me is the one I cooked up for dinner last night.
I steal the T-60 power armor parts right in front of them, and then much like in Grand Theft Auto, a quick paint job means they're no longer stolen anymore. We're ready to start the turf wars. Hilariously enough, the Brotherhood of Steel doesn't seem all that fussed by my aggression.
We'll stop the Institute. For Maxon and for the Brotherhood.
Perhaps this will be easier than I thought.
Looking synths are the worst. They hide in plain sight.
When I get off duty, that Salisbury steak is mine.
Gotta clean the Mirelux scat off my boots.
Eventually they've had enough of this guy with a tricorn hat on and clout glasses offing the people, and the battle breaks out. And it's glorious. No one will be messing with my MUTFRUIT plantations now. Unfortunately, even with a fully upgraded suit of T-45 power armor, because Preston now fires 6 nukes instead of 1, I'm still turned into goo by Preston's maniacal team-killing ways. The main reason we're here is to get the Brotherhood of Steel to consider me an enemy, and it's safe to say they do. Unfortunately, despite them considering you their mortal enemy, we can't wipe the faction out from the world just yet, not until we've finished the main story. Fortunately, the main character in Fallout 4 rips out Kellogg's cerebral implants totally unprompted when we loot him, like a total psychopath, meaning we have something we can plug into our sentient womanizer, Valentine, in order to access his memories and find the location of our son Shaun, within a mysterious faction called the Institute. Yet another faction playing around on my MUTFRUIT turf. The only problem is apparently plugging a new brain into Valentine is a dangerous process, and Dr. Amaria is apprehensive about doing it, but Florbin is a master of the silver tongue.
Could you say that like Dr. Frankenstein?
Ego, fetch me the brain.
No, I will not. Now.
Uh-huh. Could you say that like Dr. Frankenstein?
Ego, fetch me the brain.
No. Now.
Could you say that like Dr. Frankenstein?
No. Now.
Could you say that like Dr. Frankenstein?
No. Now.
Sure. Could you say that like Dr. Frankenstein?
This causes her to agree to do it, but I kick Valentine off his chair before she can implant it, and Kellogg's implant promptly vanishes from our plane of existence and goes to another dimension. We learn from the implant that there's a scientist called Virgil who can help us find our son. The only problem is he lives in a highly radioactive place called the Glowing Sea.
Oh, I'm going in naked. Fingers crossed I get superpowers.
Get him! Step off! Unload everything you got!
We find Virgil, who's a cabbage who gains sentience. He explains that we have to tear a chip out of the head of an Institute Corsair, which is an unbelievably formidable opponent. A Generation 3 synth specially selected and trained to be a lethal killing machine. They're the boogeyman of the Commonwealth, and in universe, they're virtually unstoppable. So that chip we tore from the Corsair's head has led us here, to another underground society / faction called the Railroad. Who can apparently decode it and get us into the Institute. The only problem is they're notoriously hard to find and everything's password locked. Surely the password to get in isn't a password? No, it's not, but perhaps Railroad? Or, yes, almost as bad. It's like your password being admin, dude. They appear friendly, but the conversation continues for like 40 seconds, which is too much for my poor millennial attention span to take. I promptly forget what I'm doing there, and punch Desdemona in the head because this is my MUTFRUIT turf and that's all I think about constantly. The game's mission log reminds me of my task like the single-cell organism I am. And after watching Preston nuke the railroad back 3 centuries, I log into their MSN account which has the secret CorsairChipReader.zip, and we learn how to get into the Institute HQ where my son is held. Preston gets right up in my personal space and asks me why I want to get into the Institute, even though he's been with me this entire time. What follows is a series of flawless Bethesda cutscene camera angles to really highlight the severity of the situation. Bethesda makes the most immersive games. We need to build a teleporter to beam me into the Institute HQ. I at first consider building this over Mama Murphy's feeding hatch, but after having consulted her in a prison down below, I accidentally hit her one too many times, prompting her to become hostile, and Preston prescribing her a dose of 6 nuclear blasts. Instead, I blot out the sun over Sanctuary with this monstrosity right here, accessible only by a 3-story elevator. Sturgis tells me it's imperative that I hold onto my butt lest I lose it during teleportation, and I'm sent into the Institute. My mission here is threefold. Find my son, find out if they worship the MUTFRUIT, and if they do not, then wipe them from the face of the earth. Unfortunately, without Preston, who didn't come with me. A disembodied voice introduces itself over the PA, claiming to be the patriarch of the Institute, though this could just be the jet withdrawals. It's clean down here, advanced, picturesque of what human society might have been had the Great War never happened. There's greenery, foliage, freedom from the radiation above. Perhaps this is the future of humanity. They lead me into this chamber with my son, and as the viewer, this scene brings a tear to my eye. Florbin does the most fatherly thing, and deliberately enters into a manic state.
These bad people, they stole you from me. Those bastards.
Father!
They took you from me. I'll kill them for this. All of them.
There's someone here, help me!
The leader of the institute walks in and deactivates my son, who is not my son at all, but a robot. And then this old guy, who looks like he smells like Parmesan cheese, tells me the following.
I am your son.
Liar. My son would have placed a frag mine for me before I'd even entered the room. I have no idea what's going on anymore. The Institute is peacefully shepherding me out of the building, and allows me to just manhandle each and every synth trooper I lay my eyes on. What did Bethesda mean by this? The days blur into one another. My son is dead. Probably died long before we got to the Institute, because that old cunt wasn't him. I travel the wastes with Preston, wandering from settlement to settlement, playing sad music, liberating them from whatever hardship they had faced, whether it be ghouls, bandits, starvation. And once they agreed to join the Minutemen, I would immediately turn the place they call home into a MUTFRUIT plantation. The people who once celebrated their freedom at my hands would find themselves working the fields, expanding my empire. I would stare at Mama Murphy's concrete prison. I have made her a mural so the townsfolk know where to put the jet. It has the correct pronunciation of MUTFRUIT plastered on the side of it, so that the comment section doesn't laugh at me again. It also says she is a rat. I searched the outskirts of my prison walls in Outer Sanctuary looking for the chem station everyone in the comments of my last video kept telling me was there, but I do not find it. Why do you all lie to me like this? Until one day I go to check up on our MUTFRUIT plantation at the castle, and we're assaulted by what remains of the Institute. It's a light show. But Preston is standing over there doing nothing like the sequin dress wearing sack of big dookie he is. I shout at the Preston, and then the Institute finds out why you shouldn't mess with the big boys on the block. They might be fancy with all their clean surfaces and liberal use of sanitizing hand wipes or something, but they're not nuclear armed, and sometimes neither am I, because Preston often stops to look at the wall. Your boy Blue Bathrobes guy gets out to throw hands. Short-lived. In victory, Ronnie thinks she can make a speech to my MUTFRUIT field workers, but when she said "gold darn it," the cringe was too much to bear. No speech. Mourning the loss of countless MUTFRUIT plants, we find out the Institute has water pipes that lead outside. The narrative says this is for cooling the reactors, but we know this is to prevent poopy backup. I crawl down the poopy pipe, sneak through the waterways. This ghoul had the same idea. I make my way into the Institute to summon the warheads. Then, totally unrelated, the game tells me I defended a place in Jamaica. Preston insists we evacuate any civilians in the building, then straight up nukes the foyer where probably the most civilians are. He pretends to care, but it's clear he does not. Then he turns it up to 11, and his nukes crash my whole PC. There's poetic justice to this whole trip. The Institute wanted to make the perfect machine, based entirely on uncorrupted human DNA. This is why they stole our infant child. They needed someone that hadn't been touched by the radiation outside, which was hard to do once the bombs had been dropped. And look what that brought them. A man who grows mutant fruits in a blue bathrobe. I can only imagine how irradiated that bathrobe is. Preston eventually runs out of nukes, but he had like 21 before entering the building. This means that using the MIRV launcher, he managed to fire 126 nukes within this building, and we still haven't evacuated the civilians. I go into the room where the guy claiming to be my son was, and his corpse is still on the floor, despite it being several days since the legendary right hook that shook this world to its core. I issue the evacuation order, because any survivors who make it to the surface can work my fields. I pop a stealth boy because we're not going to clear this room without a nuclear armed Preston, plant the bomb in the reactor, and we warped out of there, regrettably without my power armor. That robot kid Florber had a mental breakdown in front of now calls me his father, purely out of self-preservation, but he survives my legendary right hook. Robot or not, he is now my son. He's a good kid. Preston claims that when the screen faded to white, we banged.
That was one hell of a bang.
We did. Then his regular lust converts into bloodlust, and he immediately prompts us to destroy the Brotherhood of Steel airship, the last faction trespassing on my MUTFRUIT turf. We have to plant artillery at several of our plantations. I even let Mama Murphy out of her concrete prison so that she can operate the cannon at Sanctuary. But her time in solitude meant that she'd grown too powerful, and she leaves this plane of existence for another. I fear that she's traveled to a parallel timeline where she no longer suffers from her physical frailties, no longer suffers from her chem addictions. She uses her power of sobriety to become an entrepreneur, her clarity of mind to create her own MUTFRUIT farm, and her own food distribution business. She meets the otherworldly being who granted her the power of the sight, and right as this being was about to tell her her purpose, she blips back into existence, gets dizzy and needs to sit down. Rest now, Mama Murphy. Rest. I return to the castle to give the command to fire on the airship, greet my son Shaun, He's a good kid. But I'm interrupted when an aquatic Brotherhood fishman crawls out of the ocean and Preston nukes me. I reload and give the order to fire on the airship, but like the roaches they are, jealous of my crops, they rise up from the ashes for a final assault. I already know this will end in victory, but with nuclear-armed Preston, a victory at what cost? He goes through his usual warm-ups at the start of battle by committing massive friendly fire attacks on our own MUTFRUIT crops. Our own farmers. Everything we worked so hard for, laid to waste. Could it have not have been easier if I just exploded these people with our fist? War never changes. I haven't heard a nuke go off for a while, so I presume Preston is face down, covered in feces in a ditch somewhere. I take absolutely every chem I own and go full guerrilla warfare. And then I do it again. Victorious. The time for sending the Commonwealth back down to 0 is over. Our nuclear warfare is finished. There remains no one to oppose me and the might of my MUTFRUIT-funded war machine. I return to Sanctuary. I open the concrete prison where I'd once imprisoned Mama Murphy. She's not there anymore. God knows where she is. I place a pillory. I bind Preston to the pillory, metaphorically banishing away our nuclear weapons for good, and seal the prison. Just like in real life, the concrete box will always be there, much like missile silos. I can access them at any time. I merely pretend they're gone for good, and when I so decide to, I can unleash Preston once again, the most oppressive nuclear superpower, to seal the fate of those who oppose me. Thanks for watching. Links to the socials down below. Follow me on Instagram. Last time I posted something I was really drunk, so who knows what I'll post next. And a huge thank you to the patrons. You are the warhead to my nuclear weapons, the circuitry to my sun. Big love, honeys. See ya.